In the previous lecture, we populated our menu categories page dynamically from the server, pulling the data for our menu categories page from the Heroku app that is implemented in Ruby on Rails. In this lecture, we're going to do something very similar, but this time we're going to pull the specific category and all the menu items for that specific category. Right now I'm looking at category snippet.html, which is located in lecture 62 folder in the after folder. And the reason I'm looking at the category snippet.html, which is something we implemented in the previous lecture, is because I want to take a closer look at the hook that we used in order to get, or at least set up, in order to get to the point where we could click on a single category and get the single category menu items. Well, the hook is right here. It's on click and we're saying DC or $DC load menu items, and we're putting in this short name right here. Well, load menu items is something we're going to look at in a minute, but the short name is very important is because that seems to be, at least, the property which we use to get at the data for a particular category. Let's go back to our browser and go to our David's Restaurant app and see that there's another REST API endpoint, as they're called, that says menu items JSON. That's what we want, and we're passing it a request parameter called category, and depending on what this letters are, this letter or letters, we're going to get different results. So for example, if we do VG and actually refresh that and click on that, and let's take a look. So here, VG, it gives us an object, or gives us a string, a JSON string that will be converted to an object that has two properties in it, category and menu items. Category is yet another object, and menu items is an array of objects. So if we open that up, we could see all these objects that are inside that menu items array. They're really just menu items for the category that was returned, and the category is returned as a property called category. Now, depending on what we place here, let's place here L, for example, for lunch, and if we scroll back up here, we'll see that now we're in the lunch category, and here are all the items for the lunch category. So the point is that short name is pretty important for us because that is what we're going to use to append to this base URL right here. This is going to be a base URL, and we're going to append this, whatever that they click on, we're going to append that letter or number of letters like VG to be able to get at the particular data for that particular category. Let's close up this extra window right here. Let's go back to our code editor. And let's take a look, let's close this snippet and take a look at the couple of snippets that we're going to use for this. Number one is menu items title HTML. And since I have this implemented already, let's actually take a look at the end result. So if we're in the front page and we click on our menu item here, or menu tile, we'll get to our menu categories page, and if we click on, let's say, lunch, we'll get to our specific menu category, which is lunch menu, and you can see that we have a whole bunch of menus here, a whole bunch of menu items with pictures, and we have two components here, which is what I divided over there into snippets. One is the component of the actual heading of it, so which says lunch menu and gives some sort of specific instructions for that category, special instructions. And then we have a separate one that just lists every menu item in that category. So let's go ahead and take a look. Here is the menu items title. You can see here we're going to say whatever the menu name is, menu, like lunch menu or vegetable menu or something like that. And we're going to list the special instructions right under that. And both are basically bound to this particular thing with these curly braces, double curly braces, mustache, whatever you want to call them. But from the previous lecture, we already know how easy it is for us to insert our property values instead of these property names, so that's enough said about that. Let's go to our script.js and take a look as to how we're accomplishing this. Okay, so we have a few more URLs to deal with. Number one is we have the menu item URL, menu items URL, and as you can see, is the URL is the same URL we use, except category equals doesn't have anything equal to. Well, that's because we're going to append the short name of the category on the fly. And then there's the two snippets, the menu items title HTML and the menu item HTML. So if we scroll down, these are all the functions we've seen before, and we get to this this one that's called load menu items. And it looks very, very similar to the one before. It's basically almost the same, except that when we make the AJAX request, we are taking the menu items URL, we're appending the short name that was passed to us through the HTML snippet. Remember the HTML snippet, the category snippet, when it said dc.load menu items and it passed us the short name right here? Well, this is the one that we're looking at right now. That got closed for a second. Let me scroll back to that function. Load menu categories right here. Load menu items. So this is the category short. That's what got passed into us when the user clicked on that particular item. So our URL that we're making an AJAX request is now complete when we put those two together. And we're also designating again a function that is going to process the results of that AJAX request. And again, it's going to be JSON, so we don't need to put false in here. We're actually going to default to JSON processing. So build and show menu items HTML. Let's go and take a look at that function, which is right here at the bottom of those two. And basically, we know that category menu items is going to be an object that's going to get returned because our JSON is going to get processed. And again, we have these double AJAX requests, very similar. First, we're getting the menu items title HTML, that's that snippet. Then we're going to get the menu item HTML, that's the single one. If we take a look at here, menu item HTML, it's quite involved, but this is exactly what we basically pulled out of our single category.html page. And all it is just basically placing those properties in the proper places in order to construct, for example, a URL that we need for the JPEG that is going to be sitting inside the images folder. We have the prices here and price small portion name. Sometimes the price is small, but sometimes there's only one price. So we're going to have to deal with the fact that sometimes we're not going to have a small portion name, which is going to have one price and no other price here, and the name and the description of a particular item. So in terms of formatting, really there's nothing for us to do because we already done all the formatting through Bootstrap in the previous lectures. Okay, so if we go back to our script.html or script.js, all we're doing here is very similar construct as we're building up our menu items view HTML. And again, we're passing that object category menu items, passing the HTML snippet for the title, and passing the HTML snippet for the one single menu item. Once that gets built up and saved into menu items view HTML, all we have to do is insert it into an element with an ID main content, and we're done. And again, false here because both of those AJAX requests don't need to process these snippets as JSON. They need to process them as just a regular string. Let's take a look at this build menu items view HTML. Unlike the previously similar function, we actually need to insert some values inside of our title as well. So in this case, it's going to be name and special instructions. And the name and special instructions come from category menu items. That's that object that was returned for us from the Heroku app as our JSON that was converted into an object. Dot category, that's our property. Dot name. And the same thing here, menu items, category special instructions. So once we insert that, our menu items title HTML is actually ready to be used for our final HTML. So that's why we're starting this final HTML with this particular variable that's already kind of pre-inserted with the values of our object. And we're again starting the section as a row. This is something we stripped out of that particular snippet because, again, this is only one of these lines, and that snippet is going to get repeated over and over and over again for every single item in the menu category. So once we're done with that, we are looping over the categories. We're looping over the menu items. Well, it says as your categories, really it's menu items. There we go, this first mistake right here. Okay, so we're looping all of the menu items, and we pull out the short name because we're going to need that for constructing our URLs in order to get to our images. Because if you look at our images, our menu items are inside the menu, and then every single one has a letter, that's the folder for a particular menu category, and inside that folder we have this A1, A2, A3, and so on. That actually needs to be constructed using the short name of the category, not necessarily just of the menu item. Okay, so that's basically a bunch of inserts that is going on here. And the only difference here is that we have a separate function for insert item price and insert item portion name. And the reason we do that, let's take a look at insert item price, is because not every time do we have a price. For example, the price for a smaller portion might not even exist. So we first check whether that thing even exists. And if it doesn't exist, what we insert instead of that, obviously we can't just leave that curly brace, small portion price value or property inside our snippet. We don't want that showing up to the user. So what we're doing is we're inserting the property named price prop name, which in this case I think is something like either small price or large price, and we're substituting it with an empty string. So basically just wiping it out so nothing is in that particular snippet with that value if that value doesn't actually exist. And what we're doing next is we're actually, if it actually exists, we're going to go ahead and use toFixed2, which basically means we're going to not have $3 or something like that. We're going to have $3.00. And so we're formatting our price to be a proper dollar amount. And then we're using our insert property as before in order to put that in. So that's in the case that it actually exists, that price value actually exists. If not, we'll insert an empty string. And the rest of the HTML is very, very similar. We keep inserting the values. The portion name is the same thing. Sometimes portion doesn't exist in that type of particular value, so a large portion may not exist, or a small portion name might not exist. So that's why we need to send it through a special function, and all this code is available so you could take a look at your leisure a little bit slower, the way I'm kind of flying through this a little bit. But I want to give you the concepts of it, not necessarily go line by line. There's one more thing we need to do. Remember the clear fix, right? We can't control how large these menu descriptions are going to be. Some might be too large, some might be too short, and we don't want our grid to be messed up. So what we need to do is after every second menu item, after every second menu, or after every second grid cell, we need to place this clear fix HTML. And that's what we're doing here. We're using actually the remainder function or the remainder operator in JavaScript. So we're saying I remainder of 2, division of 2, and we're saying that if that's not equal to 0, meaning there is a remainder, so we have item 0, we have item 1, item 2, item 3, and so on. Well, item 0 is our first item, right? Because it's a 0, arrays are 0 based. Item 0 is our first item. Item 1 is our second item. And it's after the second item that we need to place our clear fix HTML. Well, that means that every odd number, and this is basically what we're saying, that every odd number index is what we need to append this clear fix HTML to. And if it is, we do, and we move on and finally produce our final HTML. And that final HTML, just like before, gets inserted into our main content, gets saved into this menu items view HTML, and gets inserted into our main content. And that's how we get, when we get to our page and click on here and click one of these items, we get our single category items page.